Hi, homeschool friends, welcome back. We are in Unit 5 on juggling multiple skills. So far in this course, we've talked about our record-keeping system, and we've talked about our big picture why and how, and the approaches that we might want to integrate, or one or two particular approaches that we might feel might be a good fit for our family. We've looked at the learning profile in our child's developmental levels and their strengths and their weaknesses. We've pulled that all together into an idea of what will likely work for our kids. And we've started making a plan on, first of all, what materials we might need, how we plan to structure our time and our space. And in this lesson, I want to talk about probably the second most important question and most frequently asked question that both new and frustrated homeschoolers ask me. The first is always, where do I get curriculum? How do I get, what curriculum is the best? And let me get that ordered. Rather than walking through the intentional steps that we have that are actually going to create a homeschool that will be successful. This issue, number 2 issue, is equally as important. And that is, I don't think I could get my kid to work with me. We have a hard time just even doing life. How am I going to get my kid to actually sit down and do school? So I'm going to break this section down into actually 3 shorter lesson videos on behavior. And we're going to talk about behavior training and how you set up a system for success so that your child actually will comply and will be willing to work with you. Then we're going to talk about motivation and how motivation is built. And I'm not just talking about rewards. I'm talking about how do you motivate a child to want to learn. And the last one is about attention. And if we have any kids with any kind of special learning need, attention is usually involved. Whether or not they have a diagnosed disability of attention deficit disorder or ADHD with hyperactivity involved also, those become really bigger issues on how to do behavior training and motivate. And so let's break this down. In this video, we're actually going to talk about what is behavior and how do we as parents deal with that. And give me a moment, I'm going to share my slides with you here. So most of us, especially if we have kids that are pretty neurotypical or have a mild learning issue, we really are wishing for our kids that they would be internally motivated and just really want to learn and want to do school and be happy, thriving, and doing their best all the time and getting their work done and being involved in activities and just shining like a superstar. Honestly, most kids are not that. Even if your friends are posting on social media about how wonderful their kids are and all the accolades that they're getting, they probably inside their homes are struggling with some of these things also. So I want to give you a realistic picture that social media, first of all, is not a place to get an accurate read on what's happening in somebody's home. And secondly, their kids struggle as much as your kids do. I can guarantee it. Because kids are kids, and kids often speak through behavior. Sometimes they don't even have the words, especially if they have a language-based disability. They may not have the words to express what they want, what they need, how they're feeling. And so behavior training comes in it's very helpful to be able to know what your kids are actually trying to tell you and what they need when they certainly can't put things into words. All right, but let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about behavior. Before I go into my list on this screen, I want to talk about how learning actually is initiated when we're first born. We have an innate desire for the basics that keep us alive: food, water, shelter. Those are instinctive things that we need as humans. On top of that, we also need love and security. And that love and security are extremely important in having a child that is compliant and wants to please and do their best, and a child who is fussy. I'm not just talking about physical colikiness. I'm talking about they're just resistant to everything, and they're always doing something that is annoying. So I want to make sure that you understand that all learning and communication starts with behavior when children are really young and prior to actually developing into language. And if you've got an older child who's nonverbal, keep that in mind, that the only way they have to communicate is through behaviors. And so learning what they're trying to communicate becomes super important. All right, in behavior training, first of all, we want to communicate with our children in the way they think logically, and children do not think like adults. Their brains are still developing, and there's been loads and loads of research over the last 100 years on how children change in the way their brains think logically, and how self-controlled they are able to be. And they certainly go through different social stages in their child development. So the first advice that I can give you in learning how to train your children to behave wherever they are, but particularly in your homeschool so that they'll work with you, is to understand, where are they developmentally? Are they a 3-year-old who stomps their feet and says no and asks why a lot? That's a really important stage in maximizing their learning, is to get that yes and to answer those whys. And as they get older, in the later early childhood and primary grades, they need a lot of hands-on learning. They learn through touch, a lot of touch. So they need manipulatives for math. They even need manipulatives for language and learning how to read. So know your child's development. The second is know your expectations for behavior. If you just go through the day and you're reactive to behavior, you are not actually doing training. They are training you. And trust me, the way that behavior works socially, somebody's getting trained. And it's either you passing along to your children your expectations, or you reacting to what they are doing, and you create a cycle of reactions rather than thinking ahead and setting expectations. Be realistic though. Children are children, and they're going to test boundaries. They're going to try, they want to, they need to try and take some risks. That's an important piece of learning. Now, are they going to climb up on the roof and jump off? There might be some of those. And then you need to know your expectations for those behaviors so that you can keep your child safe and secure. They need that, they want that. Be consistent. I know we hear that a lot, but having a plan in place helps you to be consistent and take away the emotions when you're reacting or having to deal with the consequences of a behavior. So knowing ahead of time, what are your expectations, and be consistent in having those expectations. By the way, that's one of the reasons I suggest you have a routine. A routine keeps you in that orderly sandbox that kids need to be able to take safe risks, try new things in a realistic way without going off the deep end, or without you getting all upset and angry because they've scribbled all over your favorite down comforter, and now you don't know how to get it off. Be proactive. That means have a plan in place. Of course, kids are kids, and they are going to test those boundaries, and they're going to do things that surprise you. And that's the fun part about being a parent and watching your kids grow up and being with them all day, because they will surprise you. But in the things that you need for keeping a homeschool running and happy and joyful, you need to be proactive in anticipating pretty standard kinds of behaviors. So teach your expectations. Don't just let them happen. Don't just post them on a wall like a rule, but tell your kids why. Why is it I need you to be in the living room at 8:30? Because if you're not, the whole family has to wait for you, and then it's going to take us longer. We're going to have less playtime. We might miss an outing. It's important that we work together as a team, and you're an important part of the team. So I need you to be here at morning meeting instead of up in your bathroom looking at yourself in the mirror and finding your shoes that are lost. I need you to be at morning meeting because it's an important part of our day and you're an important part of our team. So then be ready to deal with those behaviors that are unexpected, that come when a kid might be moody. And especially if you've got a kid who's got any kind of an emotional regulation issue, you will be dealing with behaviors, meltdowns especially. So think ahead. How are you going to deal with those? You've already lived with your child, especially if you're considering homeschooling. They're not just 1 and 2 anymore. They might be, they certainly could be, but more than likely they're a bit older. You know your child. What are their behaviors they do during your regular family life? Those same behaviors are going to carry over into the homeschool. So be ready to deal with them. Plan ahead. In this situation that drives you crazy, how are you going to deal with that during the homeschool part of the day? What are the little issues and what are the big issues for your family? Little issues a lot of times can just get ignored and they're going to go away. Big issues, usually not. They usually flare everybody's tempers, or they get everybody in a meltdown state and nothing functions. So looking at, okay, is this thing that's bugging me, is this a big issue or is this a little issue? Which one is it? And do I really need to make a plan to deal with it? Or do I need to just grit my teeth and ignore it? All right, don't be reactive. That is so easy to say and so very hard to do. I tell you, I've been teaching a long time. I've been a mom a long time, and it is nearly impossible. It is impossible to do it 100% of the time. And I have a teenager right now who, more than anybody in the world, he can flare my emotions in just a blink. So I'm not just telling other people things that I've got all figured out. This is an ongoing process that as your kids grow and change in their developmental stages, this is another reason why I tell you every year you need to make a plan, because your kids are different kids than they were at the beginning of last school year. Be ready to grit your teeth and apply whatever plan that you've made without emotions, because especially the big issues need to be cut and dried. It either is or it isn't. And I'm not talking about training black and white. And I truly am not talking about punishing. I'm talking about training behaviors so that your child can be a productive worker and be employable and be a contribution to society. And that comes by you having a plan and training them. It's just another form of teaching. So be realistic and consistent, not just in your expectations, but in your consequences. Okay, now here's the next part. ABCs of behavior. I want to talk about those. And I want to show you that I've made you a little poster that's in the downloads. This is for you. Print it out, put it in your lesson plan notebook, put it up in your room, put it beside your bed, put it somewhere as a reminder for you, not your kids. This is not for kids, because honestly, the kids will respond to however you have it planned. So the behavior ABCs are often used in ABA therapy for kids with autism. It's based off of operant conditioning, but it's way more than that. And I usually come from a cognitive behavior training approach, not an ABA strict operant conditioning approach. I want my kids to know why, so that I don't just have to train them for a little while and then do it and do it and do it and do it and continually come back to the same behaviors and consequences. I want them to learn why I'm teaching them this, so that eventually they've got it ingrained in their own behavior habits, and they understand the why, and they know that it's to keep them safe, or to keep them healthy, or to keep them happy. So an antecedent is the lead up trigger of what is going to come before a behavior. So let me give you an example. I had a student once who came to me, and in the past, he had had teachers who had scolded him, asked him why he couldn't read yet, and humiliated him. It was heartbreaking when I learned about his story. When he first came to me, he just assumed that I was going to be like all the other teachers. He didn't want to be there, and his mom had signed him up. And literally, he put his head down with covered his head with his arms and sat there with his head down. And I told his mom, and she said, "Oh, should I just pull him out then?" I said, "Oh, no, leave him here. We will work with it, but you have to trust me and know that he's going to be safe, and we're going to get through it. But we might not get anything done other than that for the first 2 or 3 sessions. Once we get through it, we will be fine." And she did. She trusted me. And what we did was, he sat with his head down on the table, and he didn't respond. He didn't talk. He didn't look at me. And we just sat there, and I would lay out fun things for us to do. I usually laid out 2 or 3 fun things that had no worksheets. And I'd say specifically, I'm a different kind of teacher. We are going to do fun things. I will never yell at you. We're going to have fun learning. And then I'd just sit there quietly. And before the time was done, I'd say it all again, usually about 3 times in that hour. Honestly, by the 3rd time he came, we were ready to work. He needed to know that there was consistency, and that his other triggers were not going to happen in this setting. So if you're in a homeschool, though, let's say that you go and put laundry into the washing machine, and you come back and your kid has actually broken every single crayon in the box. Now, to me, that's not a big deal. I don't care that crayons get broken, but to some moms, it might be. Or they've turned on the TV and they've thrown all the paperwork on the floor, and they just kind of wrecked the room. What was happening before that? It may have been that you left the room. And I'll explain that in our one of our next 2 videos on why you leaving the room could be a trigger. But then you want to think about the behavior. Okay, there was a trigger. Why that behavior? Why did they do that? Maybe your kid just constantly asks questions, and they're not 3 in the why stage, but they're just continually telling you factoids. I have lots of kids that love to tell me factoids, and they just are chattery, 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 chattery all the time. But they have a very difficult time actually listening. There's a reason for that. Some kind of antecedent triggers it. Is it stress? Is it a need to be seen? Is it a need to process information? There's always a why. There always is a why behind the behavior, and the antecedent is usually the clue. It may not be the answer, but it might give you a clue on why this behavior may happen. The consequence is not a punishment. Please, please, please get that through as we're talking about behavior, that punishing is the very last and very rarest form of a consequence. Positive reinforcement is actually extremely more powerful than any kind of a punishment. And much of the time, behaviors just need to not have any attention at all. We don't need to reward it. We don't need to punish it. We just need to let it be. Because maybe a kid is just processing and they just need to be a kid. So I've put 3 symbols on the poster that I've given you. Positive stands for positive reinforcement, not always a tangible reward. Usually attention and time with you is the most powerful reward of all. Food, particularly if it has sugar, is also extremely rewarding, and so is video game time or electronic time. Those are specifically designed to have an extremely high rate of reinforcement and reward. So just to give you a hint, the first reward should always be attention from you and time with you. Other rewards, but keep the big guns for when you really need to reinforce something big. The slash stands for just ignore, just let it be. Let natural consequences take over. And the negative is punishment. And yes, as parents, we need to give some kind of negative consequence sometimes, especially if the behavior was intentional and it was antisocial, like overt defiance and disrespect of somebody in the house or of what you actually were doing. Now, breaking crayons that I talked about earlier could actually be a creative outlet on trying to figure out how to mix crayon colors together, or they wanted to make something from that, or they wanted to try a different technique with the crayons. Others, it could just be, I don't like that they're dull. It's frustrating me. And a child with just slight bit of OCD may just really want new crayons when their crayons get dull. So they're going to break them in order for you to go buy more. And others are just doing it just because they are just being naughty. Any of those need some kind of a consequence. Maybe you're just going to ignore it because they were being creative. Maybe you're going to praise it and say, well, that was kind of clever. I never thought of that. Okay, let's sit down and do some art. And others, you may just say, no, I'm not buying more crayons just because you wanted crayons and you broke them on purpose. They're still very usable, and we don't have the budget to go buy more crayons right now. And you might choose, oh, okay, you're right. Our crayons were pretty worn out and we needed to replace them. That's totally up to you, but now you have a plan on at what point are you going to praise and reward? At what point are you going to ignore and let natural consequences take place? And at what point are you going to punish behaviors? All right, I hope that's given you the beginning of thinking about behavior. Just like everything else, we need to be a step ahead of our kids. that helps. We're living with them day to day, so it's not always possible to be a step ahead. But we know what the big things are that we want to train our kids in. If you're coming at your homeschool from a character training standpoint, that can just embed behavior training right into your program and cover it step by step as you cover each new character trait. So I hope that's given you some ideas. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about how, as parents, do we instill motivation, internal motivation for our kids to want to do something on their own and to take ownership of their schooling. This is especially important. It starts young. It really does start young, but it's especially important as they get older. So, all right, I hope that's been helpful. Mull over what are your little and big issues. If you need to, make a list of what you really love in how your child behaves and the things that drive you crazy. And if you need ideas, as in every other lesson, you're welcome to send me a message and I can help you brainstorm. All right, see you in the next lesson. Bye.